Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast, The Changes We Face, Government Spending and the Business of Corruption. Well, we are living in a time of upheavals and change. There's just no doubt about it. In this series, we're going to take a look at some of the changes we are facing in the coming years. We covered the extreme waste going on in our government a little bit during the election, but it's time to really unearth the degree of insanity I'm talking about here today. We are $36 trillion in debt and adding another $1 trillion to that every 3 months. The government has more income than ever before in all of our history. This isn't an income problem. It's a spending problem. And it isn't a problem limited to the United States alone. This is going on in virtually every Western government, and it has got to stop. This isn't what taxes are for. Let's see if you agree with me about that by the end of this podcast. Taxes are to care for veterans, the elderly, and the disabled. They're to pay for police, firefighters, border patrol, and the military. They're to fund schools, build roads, and other necessary infrastructure. They are not to pay for the cosmetic trans surgery of violent prisoners, or to provide art therapy for illegal immigrants, or to fund studies into the racist history of milk. They are not even to pay $21 a plate for illegal migrants, plus their hotels, in exchange for a plate of spaghetti with a hot dog cut up in it. But believe it or not, these are real examples of government spending, and they're just the tip of the iceberg. $2.7 million was spent by the U.S. taxpayer to study cats running on treadmills. $12 million was spent to study the sleep quality of monkeys when they're put on meth. Harvard spent $75,000 of the money they received from the federal government's grants to blow lizards out of trees with leaf blowers and call that a study. The government spent $2.1 million to give sex education to commercial sex workers in Ethiopia, who aren't even our responsibility, while the victims of hurricanes here in the U.S. go without. The University of Wisconsin spent $300,000 to fund a virtual reality penguin study. Another $556,585 was spent to study the difference between the feces of various mammals. Fauci's NIAID spent $478,188 on experiments to try to make monkeys transgender, because the world can never have enough transgender monkeys. The Kyrgyz Republic, I'm probably mispronouncing that, I apologize, got $9.4 million American taxpayer dollars for anti-corruption. Once again, not our problem to solve. We've got plenty of corruption of our own to sort out, apparently. You literally can't make this stuff up. As Dr. Phil said, quote, "We are being robbed of our hard-earned money by people who are taking it and spending it like drunken sailors on shore leave. Taking it and wasting it without remorse. I'm talking about our government. They are here and they ain't here to help you. The worst news is we are all enablers. We are letting them get away with it, authorizing them to the point that it has become legalized corruption. They have passed legislation right under our noses that says they can do what they're doing. We just smile and nod, keep scrolling through our phones, watching cats dance, or some other brain-numbing bullshit event. Their explanation is, well, just because, and you wouldn't understand. How dumb are we? So what's the good news? Well, we can stop it, and we can stop it now. We've stopped stupid before. Remember airlines in the 80s? They used to allow smoking in a pressurized tube for hours. You couldn't breathe. We said, hey, stop that. You're killing me. Secondhand smoke. We stood up. It stopped. Enough was enough. Think about it. Slavery, segregation, driving without a seatbelt, babies with no car seats. I could list more. We've stopped things before, but right now we're electing people who spend money they don't have, our money our children and grandchildren will have to pay. They just print more money whenever they panic. Sending money to foreign countries and never even planning to collect it. Or how is this for stupid? Paying out $3.6 million in COVID stimulus checks to 2.2 million people who were dead. Come on, guys. If you're paying dead people, who are you turning down? And it's a double whammy. The same lawmakers abusing your tax dollars, my tax dollars, to rob other Americans of their self-worth and self-esteem by creating a state of dependency. Hey, you're all oppressed victims. Keep voting for me, and I'll keep giving you free money. It's time to say enough is enough, and too much is too much. Tonight is both a wake-up call and a call to action, so hang on to your hat. The truth is coming up right now. End quote. I'll be sharing some of those truths and more with you today. So, what were these truths? To start, the government spent $1.7 billion with a B to study overheated dogs who continue to go on walks in the heat. They spent $1.8 million to study monkeys with a gambling problem. And as Dr. Phil pointed out, if the government had to fail or succeed like a regular business, at $36 trillion worth of debt from this kind of mismanagement, they would have been dead and gone, bankrupt and forgotten a long time ago. It's time to hold people to account. They can't just take our tax dollars and spend them on whatever frivolous idea takes their fancy. They can't rob us of even more money than they do via taxes through inflation by printing money like it's going out of style, making our savings worth even less just to cover up their entirely unacceptable and delusional mismanagement. To illustrate this point, Dr. Phil started up a real-time debt clock. It showed the national debt climbing by the second. When he started his show, the clock showed 34 trillion, 556 billion, 388 million, $261,178 in debt. Throughout the show, you could literally watch it climb by around 50 grand each second. It equaled out to around $103,752 of debt for every person living in America. By the end of the show, An hour later, $100 million had been added to the debt that you and I and our children will have to pay back. Again, I repeat, $100 million every hour. People have to live within their means. There is no other choice for normal people. Most of us, at one time or another, have had to go without something that would be considered a necessity because we could not afford to buy it. When my mother was a single parent, 2 grocery items she could never afford were soda and bacon. So she never splurged on those items. For years, people who have worn out shoes with holes in them, who could really use new ones, especially when facing a cold winter, have often had to make do for another year because they simply could not afford new ones. That's life. The government needs to start being held to those same standards. Like the rest of us, they need to learn to do the best they can with what they have. We cannot keep giving them a free hall pass, allowing them to define everything as necessities and go on spending money to fund their wish list items, whether we have it to spend or not. Dr. Monica Crowley, who was the former Assistant Secretary for the Treasury of Public Affairs under the last Trump administration and who is now the host of the Monica Crowley podcast, says that keeping small businesses afloat is not the responsibility of the government in the first place. She does not believe that the government should be subsidizing many of the things that it is. As in the past, they should be allowed to succeed or fail on their own merit and not based on ongoing government support. She points out that COVID was a unique emergency where extreme measures were necessary in order to keep the entire economy from collapsing, but that was never meant to become the status quo. She points out that the emergency level spending continued long after the emergency itself had ended. And that is what has gotten us here. The problem, as she sees it, is that so many temporary programs end up becoming permanent programs that we never actually end. And that causes a tremendous attitude of dependency on the government. That drives up the debt we owe and creates this kind of inflationary cycle. As Dr. Phil said, quote, "There's what you want, there's what you need, and then there's what you can afford. And those are 3 different kinds of math." There were times in my life that I needed a coat. The store didn't really care that I needed a coat. They were interested in what I could afford to pay for. So I left without a coat because I couldn't pay for a coat. And the government sets up this false economy that says, well, if we don't have the money, we'll just print some. Whether you're an individual or a business, you have to look at your income, the profits, and adjust your expenditures accordingly. There might be a lot of things that would be very useful to have that would make your life easier or your business grow faster, which you can't afford to buy right now. So you have to plan and save and make do. And if you're providing a service that is valuable, then you will survive and eventually be able to afford those things. But the government is not playing by the rules. Every time the government prints another dollar bill, the dollar that you already worked to earn becomes worth less. Inflation is theft by our government. It really can't be put any clearer than that. So if you take nothing else away today, take that one truth at least. Because in the past 3 years alone, they have stolen $8 trillion with a T dollars from you this way. $8 trillion in 3 years. This is why it costs you $20 to eat at McDonald's. Because the dollar in your pocket is worth less than when you earned it. And it is worth less because the government keeps printing excessive amounts of money to cover up its own insane spending on ridiculous projects that are entirely unnecessary. If it's not something that you would be willing to pay for out of your own pocket, then why are you willing to let the government reach into your pocket, take your money, and use it to pay for that same thing against your will? 37 million Americans live in poverty by American standards as opposed to world standards, and 12 million children live in homes that can't always provide food. Yet Congress keeps giving away literally trillions of dollars to their frivolous pet projects. Government watchdog Adam Andrzejewski, I'm probably mispronouncing that, if so I apologize, CEO of OpenTheBooks.com, regularly exposes how much of the government spending is just straight up self-serving corruption. And it all comes at our expense. He says, quote, earmarks are a small portion of the overall federal budget, but they're a favor factory where members request special projects back in their district so they can bring home the bacon. Each member of Congress gets to choose 15 local projects for their earmarks. Now, they have to be vetted in the House through the Appropriations Committee. Over the course of the last 2 years, Republicans and Democrats have earmarked 16,000 of these pet projects to the tune of $32 billion. I'm going to repeat that. 2 years worth of earmarks adds up to 16,000 projects costing $32 billion. 2 years. He goes on, here's some examples of your federal tax dollars at work. $1 million from NASA to prepare the nation's religions for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. Health and Human Services made a $1.4 million grant for sex education for California prostitutes who could probably teach the class. And then you've got $1 million that went to Cornell University, an Ivy League school with a massive endowment, and they don't need taxpayer help. And $1 million went for a study where it hurts the most to be stung by a bee. And it turns out it's the nostril. Are we having fun yet, people? It may be laughable, but what it needs to accomplish is to piss everyone off. Congress trading favors to each other to pay for each of their pet projects is just legalized bribery. According to Adam, each one of these so-called earmarks are projects that couldn't pass muster under the regular budget process. That's what earmarks are. Earmarks are an irregular process of no-bid projects that allow politicians to do whatever they want unchecked. These are all projects that a politician floated before and couldn't get approved under the rules, so they were forced to move it into the earmark category and use up one of their 15 free-for-alls. It is a way to sneak bullshit through the back door, presumably to be able to get the votes of a small interest group back home who are the only people who actually want these things. Quote, both parties have gone hog wild for this earmark spending. So you had a retiring U.S. Senator earmark $30 million of our money into the Honors College. He retires from the Senate. A couple of months later, they renamed the Honors College after him. Another earmark was to build a library, to replace a library that they had closed down because it wasn't being used. They didn't just reopen the old library, they built a new one. Recently, Congress passed a new spending bill worth $500 billion. In it, $15 million of our money was allotted to put ankle monitors on cows so we could track them. So we don't lose an animal that is literally 1,000 pounds in size. It allotted another $1 million to create a solar-powered jail in the South Pacific, not even in the United States. Vanisi, a 3-combat tour veteran who can't even get a loan for his small business from the government that he risked his life to protect, much less one of the many handouts, asked why the $8 billion in spending that our government can't even account for wasn't spent on programs to, say, help the 22 veterans that commit suicide every single day in this country. And I think that's a fair question. Quote, I fought for this country, but who fights for us? There's so many tragedies in America, and it's all going to not small businesses, but anywhere else that nobody can account for. As Monica Crowley pointed out, quote, this is about getting reelected. So they're voting their way back into power by spending money on stuff that we don't need, that nobody really wants. Bridges to nowhere and cows with ankle monitors, while our military veterans, which should be at the top of the priority, are not getting the support that they need. This is how messed up the government is and how absurd all of the spending priorities are. Calvin, who spent over 25 years working in a combination of the military and the Department of Justice, told the show that there were numerous times that they had to pay more for something in order to buy it from an approved vendor as opposed to being allowed to buy it from whoever was the cheapest, from a private company or even from Amazon. He also said that they had budgets that were allotted, and if they didn't spend the full budget one year, they wouldn't be guaranteed to receive the same amount the next year. So they were literally incentivized to spend any money that was left over in order to avoid cuts, whether they needed to spend it or not. He and his wife have had to ride out 3 government shutdowns resulting from all of this excessive waste, leaving their family incredibly unstable through no fault of their own. So people like him who showed up, whether they got paid or not, had to bear the consequences for the privileged people at the top who are the ones choosing to keep on spending so insanely over the budget that they cause the government to shut down every time we turn around in the first place. To make matters worse, Calvin can be fired from the Department of Justice if he has credit that becomes too bad, by the same people who aren't paying him and who are actually causing his credit to go bad because of their reckless spending. They're completely happy to just let the little guy bear the burden of their bad choices while they live above it all in their ivory towers. Calvin chose to keep going to work, not knowing whether he would be paid or not. Other employees chose not to go to work without the guarantee of payment. But both sets of people, those who went to work and those who didn't go to work, got reimbursed pay for that time. And the waste continues. Ginger, whose husband serves in the Coast Guard, was also a victim of these shutdowns to such a degree that her family had to turn to the food banks in order to survive after she was stiffed on 2 paychecks by the government shutdowns. They had no idea how long it would last, or if they would ever be given the back pay they were owed by the big spenders in charge. Many people who agree that all of the ways discussed so far is unacceptable still disagreed over whether or not social programs should be financed. They want more money spent on the arts. They want to ensure that medical spending continues. They want to make sure food stamp programs and housing assistance continues. They want to keep financing the Department of Education despite its abysmal results. But even if you set aside the question of, are these social programs worthwhile, the question you have to answer first is, after all of this reckless spending, is any of this even still an option at this point? Can we afford these programs, worthwhile or not? Even after the $120 million spent on interior designers for federal agencies and the $1.3 million spent to study shrimp running on treadmills, no, Dr. Phil wasn't making a joke. That's a real study. I looked it up thinking he had to be being sarcastic. Adam says that the big problem is the total lack of accountability. Quote, so you have the top 20 largest federal agencies, and this is actually pretty stunning. Every year they have to report to Congress on their mistakes, their mistaken and improper payments. And it's been averaging about $250 billion, with a T, dollars per year. In fact, over the course of the last 4 years, the admitted mistakes of the 20 largest federal agencies is going to add up to $1 trillion. Your neighborhood grocery store has better accounting controls than the largest federal programs, end quote. $1 trillion worth of mistaken payments. And that's just for the top 20 agencies. That could pay for an entire quarter of a year for the entire government alone on mistakes. As a nation, it took us 200 years to go from no debt to the first $1 trillion worth. Now, we're adding an additional $1 trillion to our debt every 3 months. The waste has got to stop, or we are not going to survive. It is that simple. When the Francis Scott Key Bridge was constructed in 1977, it cost $141 million, which would be about $740 million today. The government estimates to repair it after the collapse is going to cost over $2 billion. Where is that other billion plus going exactly? In 2008, California's bullet train project was supposed to cost $40 billion total. 15 years later, we've spent $18 billion, and they're asking for a total of $140 billion, $100 billion over budget, to build a track only 171 miles long. Almost $1 billion per mile. Are you kidding me? China just spent $300 billion to build 16,000 miles of high-speed rail. Not 171 miles, but 16,000, which would equal about $18 million per mile, or 2% of what we're paying our government to do the same thing. We are 50 times as expensive as China. Well done. In 2021, President Biden put Kamala Harris in charge of providing high-speed internet for the American people. In 2024, just 3 years later, according to the FCC Commission Chairman Brendan Carr, quote, Biden and Harris did not connect one American to high-speed internet. This despite devoting $42.5 billion to this project. And not even one American got anything in return. She was also put in charge of the government's $1 billion investment in electric school buses. How many school buses did $1 billion buy, you might ask? According to the Washington Free Beacon, there was a total of only 60 buses that we have proof were received. $1 billion spent on 60 buses. That works out to about $16.7 million per school bus. Well done, Miss Harris. Then there's the entirely unnecessary pier that we paid to build in Gaza for $300 million that Hamas kept firing on while we built it, that broke apart a few months later and floated away after killing one of our servicemen in the process. These are the projects our tax dollars are being spent on instead of on services for us, or at the very least, to help our allies. We spend millions of dollars that we don't have helping enemies that we already know stole millions of dollars in our past aid money to them to build more terror tunnels than the entire London metro system, launch a massacre against innocent civilians, including dozens of American citizens, and set up their leaders in lives of luxury in Qatar. The next politician to spend a dime of my money on Palestinians until at the bare minimum they stop electing genocidal terrorists to govern them can expect me to vote against them the first chance I get. I hope that's clear enough for you. If the Palestinians want help, they're going to have to start making some better frickin' choices in exchange, or they're on their own. The government is the only employer who has grown recently. The only sector where more jobs were created in recent years was government jobs. In the last few years, tens of thousands of additional IRS agents were added. And 65% of the inquiries they made were against people making less than $200,000 a year. So we're actually paying for our government to grow larger so that it can attack its own citizens more regularly. The government needs to be drastically shrunk, made way more efficient, and the economy unburdened by its corruption and its regulations. This is exactly why people were completely behind having Elon Musk head a Department of Government Efficiency to audit all of this nonsense. And Donald Trump has confirmed that he is appointing Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to do just that. They are tasked with finishing their assessment of the entire government, along with providing all of their recommendations for cuts within 2 years, in time to make a gift of it to the American people for the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 2026. Get it done, boys. Tear it apart. You want to know why Trump won? This sort of stuff is why. The people sent a clear message. Stop it, or we are going to see to it that you are all fired. And we've already seen the stock market respond to the promise of a brighter future. But as I told you at the beginning of this article, this isn't just happening in the United States. Charlotte Gill recently went on the Trigonometry podcast to expose what she calls, quote, the biggest scandal you never heard of, meaning the insane, wasteful studies being funded by the British government at their taxpayers' expense. Her Substack covers the woke waste funded by taxpayers who are paying for their own demise as she tracks mountains of projects that most people don't even know exist. She continues to expose the burdensome expenditures that taxpayers are being forced to shoulder behind their backs. While looking into the data on a study about non-binary inclusivity in education, she discovered another study conducted by one of the same participants. It was about exploring the concept of the non-existent category of pregnant men. This nonsense waste of a study, conducted by Sally Hines, who has conducted millions of pounds worth of studies on gender identity, while being infamously rude to her critics on X, to the same taxpayers who have had to fund her studies, had cost the taxpayers of Britain around £700,000, or almost $990,000. Charlotte was appalled at that price tag and even more outraged that taxpayers were being forced to foot the bill. And that led to her woke waste project, and the rest is history. These disdainful activist types are the norm for who is getting the funding for, I'll just say it because it's time to start calling a spade, stupid and worthless projects. Other studies that Charlotte uncovered included not only questionable charities and highly unpopular and unartistic art, as well as the indoctrination headquarters formerly known as universities, but it also funded the Europe that gay porn built from 1945 to 2000 study. It looks at how everything that Europe is, it owes to the influence of gay pornography during those 55 years. That would be after everything that actually made Europe Europe had already happened centuries earlier. One of the people conducting this study, who doesn't even live in Britain, a Portuguese man who lives in Sweden, has a special fondness for creating studies that let him study gay porn on the taxpayer's dime. So naturally, he has done multiple studies on this topic. He got about £1 million in total, 180,000 of which works out to over $250,000, was for a study on gay pig masculinity. The gist of the study seems to be documenting a certain subgroup of gay men, however large or small that group may be. Please don't tell me, I don't want to know. Who have a pig fetish, which they enjoy acting out together in barnyards. One of the participants in this study, which was immortalized on film, was a gay porn star from America. I'm so proud. Are you proud? Apparently, it is vital for mankind that this rare, I hope, fetish is documented and preserved for posterity. At your expense, of course. As Konstantin Kisin said, after a hysterically confused glance at his co-host, Francis Foster. Quote, "Look, it's a free country, but why are we researching that?" To which Charlotte could only inform him that for whatever reason, or lack thereof, this guy, who clearly has some fetish issues of his own, is part of a group that just received an £840,000 grant, over $1 million, from the British government to study gay porn in the country where he lives. Because apparently studying British gay porn isn't wasteful enough. They need to finance the uncovering of every kink practiced by every degenerate everywhere in the world and document it. Or clearly mankind won't survive. What is even the pretended value gained from these studies? According to Charlotte, it seems to be linked to the diversity obsession, primarily fostered at universities. If diversity is valuable purely for diversity's sake, entirely separate from the results that said diversity produces, then to them, it makes perfect sense to seek out ever more fringe diversity, purely because it's diverse to do so. She also says that the reality is that it is incredibly easy to get grant money for literally anything if you just embed social justice buzzwords in your proposal. One example of this that she gives is a study on decolonizing the city of York. Decolonizing it from whom? The Celtic people who have always lived there? The Saxons? The Vikings? The Normans? William Wallace? Who are you trying to decolonize it from? York has basically been York for more than a millennia. It makes no sense, but it doesn't have to. Apparently, decolonizing bizarre things is a very popular topic for these frivolous studies. One study was on decolonizing contraception. Yes, your birth control desperately needs to be decolonized. Another grant has to do with decolonizing the plant world. Just when I was sure that grass was the one thing they couldn't accuse of being racist. They're spending another £1.5 million, which is nearly $1.9 million, to decolonize folk music, to uncover the white centricity of folk music. Which basically means that white people are the main group of people who like it, and that is bad, and must change. All that decolonizing really means anymore is studying something that is deemed to be white, and declaring that to be a bad thing. Then they bring in a pretend expert to heal whatever the white thing is of its whiteness by burning sage and performing an exorcism or something. It's just a scam, pure and simple. Other studies that were approved for government grants include bedwetting and incontinence in 1870 to 1970, which pays £40,000, more than $50K in dollars, to participating researchers as part of a £250,000, more than $317K research project. The Tipuna Project is about intergenerational healing, settler accountability, and decolonizing participatory action research in Aotearoa for 310,000 pounds, nearly $432,000. 1,180,000 pounds, almost $1.5 million, went to a study on the cultural legacies of the British Empire, classical music's colonial history. Yes, white people wrote classical music. Shocking, I know. Are you just now figuring that out? Did you used to think that Beethoven was BIPOC? I mean, I'll admit that as a kid watching Top Gun, I assumed that the Righteous Brothers were African American. But even then, I knew that Mozart wasn't. Charlotte says that the great thing is not only do lunatics get money for these mind-numbingly stupid studies, but they also get to travel to exotic locations to get to the root of the issue that no one in their right mind cares about. Charlotte has uncovered a lot of international students who supposedly came to the UK to study, but somehow ended up posted back in their own hometowns, being paid to conduct a study there. One example would be a Bolivian PhD student trying to earn her doctorate who has returned to Bolivia to decolonize Bolivian museums on the British taxpayers' dime. As Constantine pointed out, the same government that is so strapped for cash that it is cutting the winter fuel allowance for its senior citizens in a place as cold as the UK, where that is literally a life and death issue, is continuing to finance BS like this in other countries, no less. A big problem is that the people who sit on these committees and approve these studies are woke academics, approving grants for their friends, who are also woke academics. Charlotte uses the Arts Council England as an example. It gets £445 million, more than 565 mil, of taxpayer money each year to spend, plus another £170 million, almost $216 million, of funding from the National Lottery, which funds a lot of woke projects. It has 4 principles which must be embedded in any pitch seeking a share of their pie. 2 of the principles have to do with evaluating whether the art project you're proposing is any good, but the other 2 that must also be included are environmental responsibility and diversity. The website makes it very clear that those investment principles must be embedded in the project and that they will be looking for them in any proposals while offering suggestions about how to include them. They are literally incentivizing people to come up with this crazy BS to try to scam money, which is how you get a non-binary dancer, Prancer the Dancer, I kid you not, applying for funding because they claim to convert their dance moves into renewable energy. Another person got funding just for identifying as a green being instead of a gender. Constantine is right that this goes way beyond waste. Waste is buying too many pairs of socks and having to give a few away. This is actual corrupt misspending of money that regular people are in desperate need of for real problems. It's so ludicrous that it's easy to find it funny, but it's important to move past the humor and into the rage that puts a stop to it. There are people who are losing their homes, unable to afford medical care for cancer or other serious conditions. People living in real poverty, unable to make ends meet, or who have kids with learning disabilities who are being ignored by liberals, drunk on their own ideology, chasing fantasy problems that make them feel important and brilliant, while ignoring the real issues in the real world. Elections like the one we just had happened because of the frustration with that mindset. Just to give one example of that, Blueprint is a Democrat-aligned group whose results cannot be dismissed as right-wing propaganda. They are responsible for crafting messaging for the DNC. It fell to them to sift through the data of exactly what went wrong for Democrats during the recent election. They polled swing voters who ended up voting for Trump and who mainly decided the election. Blueprint defined swing voters as people who had either favorable or unfavorable opinions about both candidates, people who had not voted Democrat this time even though they had in 2020, and people who were still undecided by the end of the campaign season. These polls ranked the top 25 election issues in order of their importance to these swing voters. The people being polled didn't simply list the issues in order of importance themselves. They ranked them by comparing them to each other in a round-robin style prioritization to get the most accurate look at what was going on under the surface. The number 2 issue was inflation, followed very closely by illegal immigration. But the number 1 issue that decided these swing voters for Trump was that, quote, Kamala Harris is focused more on cultural issues like transgender issues rather than helping the middle class, end quote. That is the mostly accurate impression created by Democrat elites in recent years. They care more about prioritizing their efforts on behalf of the tangential issues of very remote fringe groups than they do about doing the real work on the real issues affecting the mainstream, no matter how massive their impacts are on the little guys. So the massive majority that is made up of those little guys voted in their own interests instead of voting the way they were told that they were obligated to in order to qualify as good people. Apparently, Trump's ad showing Kamala promoting taxpayer-funded trans surgeries for violent prisoners, followed by the line, quote, Kamala Harris is for they-thems, Trump is for you, struck a nerve that the Democrats had rubbed raw. Francis pointed out that this is one of the problems with state-sponsored art in the first place. It becomes insulated from reality by not being dependent on the profits from ticket sales to survive. Entitled people believe that they are just better than everyone else, that they are just innately brilliant, and should therefore receive funding to do whatever pops into their empty little heads. Art Council England, for example, is run by a positive psychologist, whatever that is, who is extremely positive about funding anything that is pro-woke. Instead of knowing that they have actors and directors and dancers to pay, and therefore they have to create something that the public will be interested in to sell tickets or be forced to close, arts that receive government funding can produce drivel for themselves and go right on producing more drivel on your dime, whether you buy tickets or not. According to Charlotte, The Guardian has an austerity section that talks about failing woke centers strapped for cash, like the South Bank Center, which receives around £20 million, more than $25 million, already. Yet the CEO was complaining because the National Theater got a bit more funding than they did. while pensioners get their heating allowances cut. Recent performances by the South Bank Center included the Trans Voices Choir for children 5 and up, while the Globe raved about I, Joan, a play about a non-binary Joan of Arc, which was completely detached from reality and awful to boot, according to the people who were actually willing to give it a chance and who sadly actually went to see it. The BAC, in turn, put on a blood show by a non-binary female who performs with blood running down her face. But she refuses to work with an all-white cast, which I guess is her ticket to acceptance with the in crowd. I can't imagine why none of these things are making money on their own. The BAC also put on another show called First Trimester, where a trans person with a mustache searched for a sperm donor on stage to father their child with. They did this with 64,000 pounds, over 81 grand, of national lottery funding, and never even got pregnant. I don't know whether to be outraged or relieved. Instead of looking for good art first, identity is looked at first, and the quality of the art second, if at all. And if your art is heterodox and not woke, you simply are not going to get funded in Britain, whether it's good or not. The Soho Theatre, which is basically a comedy club, regularly hosts Femmes of Color nights, where women, or non-binary people, from an ethnic minority, or as they prefer to call it, the global majority, perform. They start off by warning people to check their white privilege at the door. Fair warning to you. You say that to me, I'm going to check something, but it ain't going to be my privilege. This is the same theater that had an anti-Semitism scandal for running off Jewish comics. It makes perfect sense to people who reduce everyone to the sum of their parts, based on the categories they fit into racially, sexually, by gender identity, etc. As Constantine pointed out, people can have whatever belief system or religious devotion they want to have. But why should taxpayers be obligated to pay for it? As Charlotte points out, the arts in Britain serve merely to perpetuate the religion of wokeness. They create their own parables, centered around their foundational pillars like sexual orientation or racial identity, where being white is the equivalent of original sin, with a pyramid of different hierarchies of oppressed peoples alongside the environmental movement, where they mourn about how we've hurt Mother Earth and nature is going to punish us. And if you don't go for the parables, like I, Joan, then you're labeled a bad person and excommunicated or canceled. And even though the Conservative Party, which was recently booted out of power in Britain, did speak out against a lot of this, they continued to fund it, which was a big part of why they were kicked out. They funded hate crime charities with hundreds of thousands in grants who hosted rainbow paddling sessions called Camden Pirates to fund free canoeing for the LGBTQ community. Once again, but the elderly don't get heat. They also hired food justice consultants, whatever that is, where experts lectured a truly non-existent online crowd on the mind-blowing revelation that we all need food to live. Camden and Islington funded hundreds of thousands each for queer creative art sessions. The IPPR gets £300,000, over $381,000 in taxpayer money, plus huge amounts from elsewhere, and produces in return a vlog on how to combat the far right. Trump voters in Florida already figured that out for free. Just start spraying them with hoses like naughty cats. They don't like to get wet, apparently. Little deers just scurry right back into the holes they crawled out of. Problem solved. Universities UK has received around £17 million, which is more than $21 million, in taxpayer funding, and it is just a group of lobbyists promoting the universities and asking that they receive even more money than they already do, which is around £9 billion a year currently, which is more than $11 billion. Maybe the lobbyists should give that £17 million that they're getting to the universities and go out of business, and then everyone is happy. The MP's Register of Interests in the UK lists every MP in Parliament, who they've worked for, who they received funding from, and anything they hold shares in, which requires about 780 pages to cover everyone. The problem is that not only do the politicians fund anything and everything, especially if it's woke, but they have funders who they rely on and who are very clear about their agendas. Dale Vince, for example, runs several energy companies and funded Extinction Rebellion and Just Up Oil. He gave £5 million, which is more than $6,350,000, to the Labour Party. Do you think it's safe to assume that he has some priorities that he'll want in exchange for his donations? This is a quid pro quo world, after all. The Climate Change Committee was a task force created under Tony Blair to help Britain reach net zero. And the people involved in it own shares in renewable energy companies, which makes them conflicted. As Charlotte points out, if they had shares in oil and were put in charge of deciding the energy policies, they would be incentivized to choose policies that would just so happen to make them a lot of money. But because in Britain people assume that if it's green, it's good, it allows these people to hide their corruption in plain sight. She goes on to explain that the former MP, Chris Skidmore, who signed net zero into law, was getting £80,000 per year, over $100,000, from something called the Emissions Capture Company. He was also getting £40,000 a year, which is more than $50,000, from a higher education company. And what do you know? He pushed very hard for higher education and net zero. He even wrote a book called Why Net Zero is Great. Jeremy Corbyn gets around £15,000, which is more than $19,000, from an organization called We Deserve Better, which Charlotte could find no info on, besides it being linked to a bunch of woke projects like the 4-day week. MP Carla Denia also gets funded by them, and Charlotte says there is a lot of crossover between these groups. So when a politician starts promoting something, one has to ask, is this coming from you or from your mysterious donors? Which is what happens when you allow politicians to be funded by outside sources, who then get to determine and incentivize what policies their purchased politicians legislate. The main thing is getting the information that this is happening out there, exposing the waste and the corruption and the bloated bureaucracy. Because when enough people understand the scale of the problem and the extremity of the disrespect being shown toward the working class by these privileged, ivory tower, big spending brats. We will all eventually reach a point where the peasants revolt and say, no, we're not giving you any more of our money for this kind of stuff. The people actually have rights in a democracy, and the elite's warped version of that is being roundly rejected right now. Britain has to care for itself. What they do isn't any of my business, but what America does is. People all across the West are going to have to choose for themselves, and you see people doing just that, electing leaders like Javier Milei in Argentina, and Trump here in order to get Elon Musk to rip it all apart. That sentiment only grows when rumors start spreading that FEMA was denying aid to hurricane victims on the basis of whether or not they were Trump supporters. We were assured by the media that this was misinformation. Turns out it was completely true, and there's proof. There are screenshots of the orders for FEMA workers to not go to homes that had Trump signs in their yards, listed casually next to instructions to stay hydrated while working. Then we were assured that it was an isolated instance, the fault of one rogue worker who had been fired as a result. That turned out to be untrue too. That fired worker has come forward to confirm what we already suspected, that she did not come up with that instruction on her own. It was a widespread mandate at FEMA. She encouraged people to look into other states where she was not posted, promising we would see the same things there. Coming from an agency that already held a web seminar about changing their priority from helping the most people to prioritizing people based on their race, even if that meant helping fewer people overall, the idea of then extending that to discrimination on the basis of political beliefs as well as race, it is not even that shocking. It is, however, entirely unacceptable. As is the behavior of Myrna Al-Sharif, a reporter for NBC, who scooped the Daily Wire's breaking story on this without repeating the details of the story in order to obscure what was really going on. When she was called on her lack of professional standards, she underscored her unprofessionalism, as well as her general lack of class, by responding, "Stay mad," then calling her legitimate critics trolls and the B word, before degenerating into yo mama insults like it's still the 90s. Finally, her employer had to tell her to quit posting because she was embarrassing herself and them. This is the same media that expects us to share their dismay that things are about to change? I don't think so. The dismay is all yours. Enjoy sucking on each other's thumbs and swaddling yourself in your security blankets. May they bring you comfort. The rest of us are more than ready for some change. In fact, we are cheering it on. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast, and I hope to see you again next week. Have a good week, my friends. For those of you interested in a little bonus material, I'm going to give my thoughts on the week's headlines because, what can I say? This is how I get my jollies now, people. I have to just say that I am loving Trump's picks for staff at this point. He's chosen Susie Wiles, who led his campaign, as his chief of staff, She's the first woman to serve as a chief of staff. She seems incredibly competent. Love it. Marco Rubio is going to be the Secretary of State. All of these, of course, are assuming they pass approval by the Senate. He seems like a very competent guy. Seems like he'll make a good Secretary of State. Mike Waltz is a Green Beret. He'll be the National Security Advisor. Makes perfect sense. I mean, Green Beret kind of speaks for itself. Kristi Noem is going to be in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. Well, at least the cartel's drones will start being shot down, because if there's one thing we know about Kristi Noem is she doesn't hesitate to shoot things. The UN ambassador is going to be Elise Stefanik, who took Claudine Gay and the other anti-Semites to task in front of Congress. Excellent choice, once again. Matt Gaetz has been nominated for the Attorney General, and I'm just going to be completely honest. I know nothing about this guy. So when I know nothing about it, I don't just come up with stuff to spout off. There are allegations that kind of seem like, if they're true, would make him a little bit unfit for the office. And yet, coming from a media that's freaking out about all of these appointments, most of which I know to be good choices, I take their criticism of him with a grain of salt. But if they prove to actually be right in this case, there's plenty of other people that can be nominated, and that's what going through Senate confirmation is for. So I don't really care one way or the other. We'll find out whether he's a good pick or not. Tom Homan has been appointed the border czar, and I already love this guy. He's the person who used to be in charge of ICE. He's incredibly frustrated with the way his hands have been tied by the previous administration, and he is promising mass deportations. The media has freaked out, telling us, see, we tried to warn you. He's going to deport people, and not just the violent criminals. He's going to deport all the illegals. I told you this would happen. You didn't understand what you were voting for. No, sweetheart. We understood exactly what we were voting for. We just don't want the same things you do. This is what we voted for. You see, you're starting on the base assumption that we all agree that illegal immigrants who committed the crime of breaking and entering into our country should get to stay as long as they don't commit any additional crimes. You're assuming that we've already agreed to that, and therefore, if we voted for tighter immigration laws, that's because we were deceived. We thought that they would let all those people stay and only deport the violent criminals. Here's the problem, hun. Your base assumption is wrong. We weren't deceived. We knew what we were voting for. We don't agree to your premise. It's true. We are a nation of immigrants, and Americans, as a whole, are the most pro-immigration people on the face of the earth. We love an immigrant success story. We love being the melting pot that welcomes everybody to come in and learning about other cultures. What we have a problem with is people whose very first act coming into this country was not, hey, I come from a bad place. I want a chance at something better. America is the dream. And I just want to come in and be a part and work hard. And the only thing you're going to hear from me for the rest of my life is thank you for giving me that option. We have no problem with immigrants like that. We welcome them to the party, same as if they've been here for however many generations our families had. But there's a big difference between that kind of immigrants like my great-great-grandfather, who when he came through Ellis Island sure did not get housing, food, free medical care, all of these benefits, debit cards, all this sort of stuff, and then turn around and complain that there weren't enough translators being provided for them, the food quality wasn't up to snuff, and by the way, we want trans surgeries. And he sure as heck didn't take that attitude. After breaking and entering into the country, making his first act on American soil, flipping the bird to the American people. Yeah, those people know. Now, do I understand that, hey, when the border's wide open and Democrats are promising them, it doesn't really matter. Why wait in line and do this the right way? You might as well just come across, because we'll make sure that you're not ever held to account for that crime. Well, it turns out you lied. You made promises you can't keep. Your mouth wrote checks that your ass can't cash, because the rest of us get a say too. So, no, we're not shocked and appalled, worried that we've been tricked. We knew what we were voting for. This is what we are voting for. Immigrants are welcome, encouraged even. But they have to come in with the intention to become a part, not to expect us to accommodate them. They have to come in willing to assimilate and work. We do get to choose which ones meet our standards and which ones don't. And all of them, as in 100% of them, have to come in legally. If they don't, they get deported. It does not matter to me if they are grandmas, children, whoever. You don't get to break the law. And as far as this whole argument that that's going to mean breaking up families, all criminals have their families broken up. If you murder someone and you have a child, you go to jail. And unfortunately, the default consequence of your irresponsible crime is that your poor innocent child suffers the loss of a parent. And that's awful. And we do sympathize with those children. But we don't just say to the father, well, you murdered someone, but since you have a kid, you aren't going to jail, because we don't want to break up families. It's the same thing with this. And the families, in this case, at least have the option of staying together, because if they came onto our land illegally and had a child while they were here that is American, they can choose to take that child with them when they're deported. They don't have to leave the child behind. And if that child chooses when they're 18 and they're grown to come back as an American citizen, well, then so be it. But we're not going to just say, oh, well, so I guess everybody, all 20 members of that one child's family get to stay because we can't break up a family. I guess you should have thought of that before you came in illegally. And by the way, we need to avoid this problem in the future. You are not allowed to profit from your crimes. That law is already on the books. If you're a serial killer or you're O.J. Simpson, you don't get to write a book about what you did and profit from the crime. And the same needs to apply to immigration. If you are here illegally and you're not supposed to be here, and therefore your child is not supposed to be born here, and you have a child while you're here, that child should not be given U.S. citizenship, and that needs to be put into law. Your child gets U.S. citizenship if you are here legally. Now, of course, we cannot make that retroactive to people that already have citizenship because they were born here, but we can avoid this problem in future by spelling that out in law as an extension of the laws that we already have, which say you cannot profit from crimes, and entering the country illegally is a crime. But I think my favorite appointment so far is Pete Hegseth, who's an Army major who served in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's going to be the new Secretary of Defense. He won the Bronze Star twice. He's a graduate of Princeton and Harvard. He wrote a book about ridding the military of its woke propaganda. He's extremely pro-Israel, which I love about him. It's nice to see an adult who has a moral compass that points north. He's got his head on straight. And your attempts to say that he is just a weekend news anchor while ignoring the rest of that and have a laughingstock like Elizabeth Warren say she's more qualified to be the Secretary of Defense because she has brothers in the military. And that makes her more qualified than the guy that himself did 2 tours in the military in combat zones where he distinguished himself by winning 2 Bronze Stars are pathetic. I love this appointment. And frankly, I love his idea about hiring the people who worked on Top Gun Maverick in order to make some good commercials for the military for a change. Maybe we'll actually have people joining again instead of failing to meet the recruitment standards that we need in order to continue functioning. And compared to the last Secretary of Defense who went AWOL for an entire week, who let China fly spy balloons over the entire country for prolonged periods of time, and drones spy on military bases, including nuclear facilities. The guy who oversaw the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and has been letting Houthis in inflatables hold up the world's shipping in the Red Sea because he's too busy making sure that he uses the right pronouns for those Houthis. And for Rachel Levine, I really don't see how this guy could be worse, and he seems to be a dramatic improvement. As I already said, the Department of Government Efficiency is going to be headed up by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Love it. The Director of National Intelligence is going to be Tulsi Gabbard, who has served in the military. She's an incredibly impressive woman. Love it. Matt Gaetz is going to be the Attorney General. Don't know a whole lot about him. The little bit I do know seems like a good choice. Doug Bergen is going to be the Secretary of Interior, who's responsible for drilling in the national parks. And as the governor of North Dakota, he is pretty qualified to know about our natural resources and national parks. Seems like a reasonable choice. Those are the appointments we have so far. In other news, I heard that Eva Longoria is leaving the country. She's going to move to Mexico because she's scared of Trump. Now, I'm going to be real honest. I didn't know Eva Longoria was still here. I have not heard her name since Desperate Housewives in 2002. And I didn't watch that show even then. But I at least was aware she was on the planet. Then she married a basketball player. I don't know which one. At the time, I probably could have told you, but don't remember. So why exactly am I supposed to care? I mean, I will give her credit. At least she's actually following through because all these celebrities make the earth-shattering announcements that they will flee the country and move away. And since in their minds they are the sun around which the little people orbit, our entire universe will be disrupted. Can you people turn the narcissism down to an 8, please? It makes no difference to my life whether you live on this side or that side of an imaginary line on a map. I don't care where you live. I don't know where you live now. I have no idea. Do you live in Beverly Hills? Do you live somewhere else in the country? Do you spend most of your time in other homes overseas? Do you live in Malibu? I don't know, and I don't care. I don't wish you ill. But, I have my own life going on. And like I said, I haven't thought about Eva Longoria since 2002. So, why am I supposed to go into mourning because she's decided to move? People move all the time. Once again, turn your narcissism down to an 8, please. None of us care where you rich, privileged celebrities choose to live. Live wherever you want, and I wish you well. I don't care. I don't care at all. If you want to live somewhere else, I hope you're happy there. But why are you announcing it as though it has some sort of impact one way or the other on me? Or most people out there? Because I'm here to tell you it doesn't. Meanwhile, Rachel Maddow has uncurled herself from the fetal position where she's been since the election long enough to spew more delusional nonsense, which has caused everyone with an IQ over 70 to turn off MSNBC permanently, which is why they are sinking beneath the waves of complete irrelevance. The problem with Rachel Maddow and Joy Reid and all the other disconnected nut jobs at MSNBC is that they're the journalistic equivalent of that college student smoking pot in their dorm room who thinks that they're having brilliant insights that could fix all of humanity's problems when they're actually just staring at their own hand going, dude, fingers move. They have never once in their entire life allowed their eyes to focus on the entire world beyond their fingernails. If the leadership of MSNBC had any sense, they would see that they're tanking and scrap all of these people, write them off as unsalvageable woke drug addicts who are hopelessly addicted and at this point completely incapable of lifting their heads out of the puddle of their own ideological vomit. MSNBC should simply start over with a little bit of balance and people that have at least a tenuous grasp on reality. But they won't, which is why they're not going to survive in the long term. RFK has been appointed as Secretary of Health and Human Services. We'll be delving into that a little bit more next week, but as a big supporter of the MAHA movement, I absolutely love this appointment. The media is losing their minds because, according to them, he's anti-science. Have you read his book on Fauci or anything else? This is an accomplished trial lawyer who I know you've tried to convince people for the past few years is a conspiracy theorist. But when I stopped listening to you about what he had to say and started listening to him about what he had to say, he seemed really sane to me. So here's my question. If RFK is anti-science and should therefore be rejected to hold this office, before you get to make that argument, you have to answer me one question. Can men get pregnant? Yes or no? One word. Yeah. You lost the right to criticize anyone for being anti-science a long time ago. Leanna Wen, who writes for the Washington Post, was originally upset about this, but to her credit, she did what journalists are supposed to do and actually looked into it. She was specifically attacking RFK for wanting to take fluoride out of the drinking water, and She had an instinctive reaction of, oh, that's crazy. We put that in there for a reason. It needs to be there. But to her credit, she looked into it. And turns out that's a policy from an age when fluoride was not widely available in toothpaste, which is no longer true. And there are, at the very least, correlations with problems caused by fluoride in the drinking water. There's a difference between correlation and causation, between something having a statistical link, but we haven't proved that it caused the problem. It's just related to it in some way. We don't know yet, but she acknowledges, hey, now that I've actually looked into this, this really is something that we should at least revisit. And that is a reasonable person's thought process, that you look into something, you don't just stick to your instinctive conclusions, and if it turns out there's some validity to what's being presented, you're open to it, as opposed to sticking stubbornly to the party line and just going, no, nothing can change, no, like you're holding on to a security blanket as a toddler on your first day of preschool. So her article actually wound up being the exact opposite of what she intended it to be, because she wound up acknowledging this is a topic that actually does need to be revisited. Amazing what happens when you leave your echo chamber to at least hear the other guy out. You know, this is why I like Anna Kasparian from TYT. She's capable of changing her mind, just like she did about nuclear power. She was instinctively against it, instinctively thought that nuclear power was unsafe. Then she did the research, and turns out it's actually the safest form of power. More people die from electrical lines, from wind farms, from all of these things than have died in nuclear power problems. And it's the cleanest form of energy out there, so it's a double win. You know, when she was willing to change her position based on the facts and actually demonstrated that she cared more about being right than she cared about sticking to the party line. She cared more about the truth than playing for a particular team. That made her trustworthy to people like me who are open to arguments from both sides. The rest of the lib propagandists could take a lesson from these two women. I will leave you with my favorite clip from this week. It is a clip of Mike Tyson being interviewed by a 12-year-old social influencer. I will shock you all with the revelation that I don't follow boxing. Not because I'm morally opposed to it or to violent sports. Hey, I grew up in a household full of brothers watching action flicks. I'm fine with it. But I don't follow most sports. And boxing happens to be one of them. In fact, my total knowledge on Mike Tyson can be summed up in the one fact that he bit someone's ear off during a boxing match. I can't even tell you whose ear. Thus beginneth and endeth my knowledge on Mike Tyson up until this clip. And people, I absolutely love this clip. If it were possible to frame an internet clip and put it on my front door so that when people rang the doorbell, it would play at them, it would be this clip. I absolutely love it. Here we go.
Well, in your return to the ring for this fight, you are setting a monumental opportunity for kids my age to see the legend Mike Tyson in the ring for the first time. What type of legacy would you like to leave behind when it's all said and done?
Well, I don't know. I don't believe in the word legacy. I just think that's another word for ego. That's just some word everybody grabbed onto. I was used every 5 seconds. It means absolutely nothing to me. I'm just passing through. I'm going to die, and it's going to be over. Who cares about legacy after that? What a big ego, so I'm going to die. I want people to think that I'm this, I'm great. No, we're nothing. We're just dead. We're dust. We're absolutely nothing. Our legacy is nothing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That is something that I have not heard before, someone say that as an answer.
Can you really imagine somebody saying, I want my legacy to be this way when you're dead? Do you think somebody really wants to think about you? I want people to think about me when I'm gone. Who the cares about me when I'm gone?
I love the hopeful 12-year-old just having her dreams crushed. And that's why I'm quoting you, Ecclesiastes 3:20. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. For everything in life there's a time. Everything in life is a season. For living, for dying. We don't mean nothing. We're all gonna die someday anyway. Sun's gonna explode. Eat all planets. Ain't nobody gonna be around to remember you then. And just explain to you something.
Nice, Tyson Ben.
Aurelius. And let me tell you about the Stoics. The Roman Stoics. Because let me explain. Love it. Love it. More of this. Mike Tyson on philosophy would be... I would listen to that show every day. That'd be amazing. I'm going to explain to you about a little bit of Augustine. And what he was saying about the city of God. I want it. I want it. I want him on Sartre. Existentialism. Let me tell you about existentialism. The idea that you don't mean nothing. Except you walking around a cold, empty universe on a rock, a godforsaken rock. And all you got is your will, how you react to that. That's life, man. And then you die. And don't mean nothing. I'm pitching this show for Daily Wire Plus. I am Mike Tyson on philosophy. 10 out of 10. Love it. All right, folks. Meanwhile...
I would so watch that show. Pitch it, Ben. I want that show. In fact, I have a modification to make. You know, you've collabed with Jordan Peterson, on like Exodus and, the foundations of the West and everything. I want Tyson and Jordan to do a collab on the Stoics. My request to you, man, make it happen. But unfortunately, before we go, I have to reach out and, sadly, correct Ben's coworker, Matt Walsh. Now, Matt Walsh, as you may know, is the king of canceling. And what can I say? I love the guy. He cracks me up. I mean, I get my daily laughs from that man. Love him. So it breaks my heart to have to call him out as being wrong about this clip. But here I am, falling on my sword, knowing that he will never hear this. And if he does, he will tear me to shreds in a tirade, which will make me laugh just as much as when he does it to other people. But Matt made the case that you should care about your legacy. You should care about the impacts of your life. But that's the fundamental problem with your argument, Matt. Impact is not the same thing as legacy. Yes, all of our lives have an impact, and you should live as though that's important because it is. Those ripple effects keep spreading. But that's not what legacy is. Legacy is how you're remembered. And Mike Tyson said, none of us are remembered. He even specifically said that beyond his children and grandchildren, he won't be remembered. And that's true for virtually everybody. I mean, let's really go to the top of the food chain here and let's ignore the millions and millions and billions of people that have lived on this planet that are not remembered. Out of all the kings, people who ruled countries and empires, how many kings can you list, Matt? These were kings. And I bet you can only list a handful of them. Definitely only a handful that you can tell me what the impacts of their life were. Now, yes, their life still had impact. We may not really remember them. Most people, unless they're studying that person for specific reasons, cannot tell you what those impacts were, what did they do during their reign. But those impacts still spread, and that is important, and that should be important to us. But they're not remembered. They don't have a legacy. Take here in the United States. Vice presidents Second most powerful man on the face of the earth. How many American vice presidents can you name? I mean, other than ones that went on to become president like John Adams, how many of them can you name? They reached incredible success. Or let's forget vice presidents, presidents. Okay? How many presidents? The most powerful man on the planet. You achieved that. You became president of the United States. And how many of them are remembered? How many people out there can name all of the presidents besides listing off just, the main hits of Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, JFK, and the presidents of our lifetime, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush again, Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. I mean, how many people out there do you think can honestly name all of the presidents, much less tell you what the effects of their administration were? Now, of course, their administration did have effects. And the impact of your life is something we should all take seriously. And I agree with you. I disagree with Mike Tyson that we won't be anything after we're dead. I agree with you that there is more beyond this life. But the part that I take issue with is this conflation of the idea of your life mattering versus your legacy mattering. And Tyson was just saying that your legacy is an illusion. It is your ego saying you're so important that you're going to be remembered, when the truth is, no, you're not. If presidents, people who became president, people who became kings have been forgotten, except in some book in the back of a dusty library, all of us are going to be forgotten. Even you one day. You are way more famous than most people. You have a very popular podcast. But even you, once your children and your grandchildren, maybe your great-grandchildren, are gone, and the world has moved on to other podcasters and whatever, you will be forgotten too. Now, your life will have still had impact, the things you fought for, but And of course, the immediate impact of the way you raised your family and the way they raised their families. But your legacy is an illusion. It will not be remembered. So, unfortunately, it is now time to cancel the King of Cancel. At least for the next 12 hours. Because, hey, I never miss a show. After all, you are my third favorite DW host. And before you object to that, just realize that I am going against my own people in order to give you a spot on the podium. And we all know what happens to Sicilians who side against the family. I ask that that be taken into consideration when considering the degree of my cancellation, because I do not deserve to be on a list with Meghan Markle. Show some restraint, Matt. As for the rest of you, thank you for listening to this week's podcast, and I hope you have a good week. Take care, my friends.